Masechet Ketubot Daf Yod Bet. The Mishnah that we're in the middle of discussing mentioned the case where a woman is married and her husband dies soon after the wedding, making it unlikely that they consummated the wedding, so therefore she probably is still a Betula. If a second husband then comes and marries her on the assumption that she is a Betula and finds that she is not, he cannot claim that he's not going to pay her, because since she was already married, even though he died soon after the marriage, he should have suspected that they could have found some time to be able to consummate the marriage. We're going to see a Baraita now that elaborates on a similar case. Tenor Rabbanan, kenasa rishon l'shum nisuin. There was a first husband who married this woman, and for marriage, meaning that they would are expected that they would consummate the marriage. However, she has witnesses. Listen, our friends here these witnesses were with us the whole time. We were, even if it's a longer time, or we went on a honeymoon, we came back, but they were with us the entire time, and they never left our side, not even for a minute. And they can testify that me and my husband, we were never alone together. We never had yichud, and therefore I'm still a betula. Or if the witnesses say, yeah, they were together for a very short time. They were together just, for 30 seconds, but not enough time that they could have had bi'ah. Either case. And Hasheni Yachol Liton Tanat Betulim. The second husband, when he comes and he marries her, and then after on their wedding night he does not find Betulim, he cannot make a claim and say that I'm not paying you what I told you, because since it's true that there were witnesses and he was relying on the witnesses. Nevertheless, it could be that the witnesses missed some time where they went to Yichud, and he should have suspected that, it could be that they had bi'ah, and so she is not a bitula. And he agreed to marry her nevertheless, so therefore he cannot claim Shahareh kenasa rishon, because the first husband was actually with her. In this case, he had promised her 200 in the ketubah, assuming that she was a betula. Now, he finds her be'ula, he wants to say mekach ta'ut, because I assume you're betula, and I want to pay 0. But the law is that he's still going to have to pay 100 because he should have suspected. So it's not mekach ta'ut. So that's the law in that case. Now, Rabbah is going to derive a more general rule from this. Amar Rabbah zot omeret, kenasa bechazkat betula v'nimset be'ula, yesh la ketubah maneh. In general cases, not like this one, where, let's say she was not married before, but whatever, a man marries a woman assuming that she is a betula. She claimed to be a betula, and he assumed that was correct, and turns out she is be'ula. There's no betulim, so he cannot give her 0. He still has to give her 100. That's what Rabbah said. Rabbah Amar be'alma le'olam emalach let lakela. Rabbah said, no, I don't agree to that derivation, that generalization. In a general case, the husband could give her nothing. You said you're a betula, you were not. Mekach ta'ut, forget it. The whole deal is off. The difference here is that since she was already married to a previous husband, even though there were witnesses, but the witnesses are not foolproof, so therefore we expect him to have known that there is a chance that she did in fact have bi'ah with the first husband, and therefore he can't say mekach ta'ut. Right? There's some likelihood that he had to take into consideration, and in this case he has to pay 100. But in other cases, when she was not married before, 0. So that's Rav Ashi argues against Rabbah. Now we ask, how do you know that? Why don't we worry that maybe she cheated on her second husband here after the wedding, after the kiddushin, or any time after the kiddushin, and therefore he can say, hey, out, you this is an adulterer, and you get nothing, and they separate. No, we're talking about a case where they did kiddushin and bi'ah one right after the other. Kind of like today, we do kiddushin and nisuin back to back with just a couple of minutes in between. And let's say right from there, they went and consummated the marriage immediately. So there was no possibility, no chance that she could have committed adultery in between. So that's why we cannot make such a claim. All right, that's one version of that discussion between Rabbah and Rav Ashi, but that we apply it to that Braita where there's witnesses. However, there's the same exact discussion, but it applies to the Mishnah, our Mishnah, rather than to this Baraita. Vika de matni la amat nitin. Our Mishnah, which this whole discussion is on, said, Betula almana gerusha chalusa mina nisuin. So if someone who's a betula, and she's also an almana, meaning she got married and the husband died very soon after the wedding, so our presumption is they did not consummate, or they divorced immediately after the ceremony, or she was a chalutza, which means she would be almana also, and she was already married. Ketubatan maneh ve'en la tanat betulin. She gets 100, and the husband cannot say, "Hey, I thought you were betula, you told me so," no, and therefore get 0. No, you get 100. Now, betula min nisuin hechi mashkachat la. What kind of case is this that she's a betula even though she was already married? She did enter the wedding canopy, and they had some ceremony, that's sheva berachot, but there was no bi'ah. Okay. Amar Rabba, Zot omeret kenasa b'cheskat betula nimset be'ola ketubata maneh. It's about this Mishnah that Rabba said we can derive from here a more general rule that anytime someone marries assuming that she is a betula, and then turns out she is a be'ola, meaning she was not a regular case where she was not married before, this is her first marriage, and turns out she does not have betulim, she doesn't get 0, rather, ketuvatan maneh, she gets 100, just like we say in our Mishnah, ketuvatan maneh. Rav Asher Amar be'alma le'olam emalach let lakela. Rav Asher says, no, this case is different. In a general case where this is her first marriage, she says she's a betula, turns out after the wedding night she's not, he says, mekach ta'ut, right, forget it, I'm out of here, and you get 0. But in this case it's different, because after all they did have a wedding ceremony, and so it could be that they had bi'ah, maybe we just didn't realize it. And so he should have taken into consideration that possibility, and he can't say mekach ta'ut. He knows that she was married before, so all right, he was hoping that she's a betula. She's not, but you can't say that you're totally surprised, and so therefore you can't give her 0. You have to give her 100. And the same thing. Wait, how do you know? Maybe she's the reason she's a be'ula is because she committed adultery after the kiddushin. No, we're talking about a case where she did kiddushin and they did the nisuin and he had bi'ah immediately, and so there's no possibility that she cheated on him. Okay, so that's all the same exact conversation, but now on the Mishnah instead of on the Baraita. Now we know manda matnila abaraita kol shekena matnitin. The one who applied it, the first version where we applied this on to the Baraita, they would say, you know what? Regarding the Mishnah, all the more so. The reason is because in the Baraita we actually had witnesses that said that we saw, and they were not together the entire time. And even there, Rav Asher said that you can't derive from here to any other case because they were married. And he's saying that even though they were actual witnesses. In the Mishnah, all the more so, Rav Asher would argue that you can't make a generalization from the Mishnah to other cases, because in the Mishnah there were no witnesses. It was just he died a short time after. So we presume they probably weren't together. But in the Mishnah, if anything, there's more likelihood that they could have been together. And yet Rav Asher says, in that case, the second husband should have been suspicious, and gets only and gets 100, and that's a unique case. Even though there were no witnesses, even the Mishnah is a unique case. So for sure, if you apply it to the Baraita, you apply it to the Mishnah. But the second version that applies it to the Mishnah, avala Baraita lo, they would not apply it to the Baraita. Mishum demaseh amar la ana edim samche, because regarding in the Baraita, the husband could say, I was relying on witnesses. In the Mishnah, you have no witnesses. So there, you tell him, too bad, you should have suspected. In the Baraita, he can say, no, there were witnesses that said you were not together with your husband the entire time, and therefore I relied on that, and now I find you be'ula, so maybe you could, in that case, there's more likelihood to say that's 0 than in the Mishnah. All right. Next Mishnah. האוכל אצל חמיב ביהודה שלא בעדים אינו יכול לטעון טענת בתולים מפני שמתייחד עמה. Someone who eats with his in-laws in Yehuda. Eats means that he actually lives in the house of his in-laws after Kiddushin, before Nisu'in. Usually, like in the Galilee, they do Kiddushin, give her money, he gives her money, and then they'll wait a few months till he can get his things in order, buy a house and so on, and then, only then, will they'll do Nisu'in and live together. But in Yehuda, there was a custom that people, the groom would eat and live in his in-laws' house together with his fiancée. So someone who does that, and there's no witnesses to say they were separate the whole time. They slept in separate bedrooms. They were never together. If there's no witnesses, then we have to assume that there's a good likelihood that they were together. So in that case, when the wedding time comes and he says, hey, there's no betulim, he cannot make a claim and say, I'm not going to pay you. He has to pay because we presume that they had yichud. They were together, and probably he is the one that did it. What's the reason for this custom in Judea? A couple of explanations. One is that they wanted the couple to be more accustomed with each other, so they wouldn't be so embarrassed on the wedding night, and so they spend some time together. I guess they kind of hope that they would not consummate before that. Another version is related to the Yerushalmi and other Rishonim, that this is at the time of persecution, when the general would come and take every bride, so we got a chance for the husband and wife to be together before the wedding night, before the general would come and ruin it for them. Okay, since it says someone who eats, meaning lives, in his father-in-law's house, that person cannot claim ta'anat betulim. Since it says one who does, it sounds like not everybody did, and some people in Judea did not eat and did not live in their father-in-law's house, and so then that would be a regular law that they could make a ta'anat betulim. Abaye says, yes, indeed, that I agree that it sounds like there are different places within Judea. Some people, they did live together. Some people, they did not live together. Kedatanya, and this is proven by the following Baraita. Amar Bihuda, בראשונה היו מייחדין את החתן ואת הכלה שעה אחת קודם כניסתן לחופה, כדי שיהיה ליבו גס בה, ובגליל לא היו עושים כן. So Braita gives the reason that we said explicitly here. At first, they would allow the bride and groom to be together in seclusion a short time before the marriage. Not the whole time of Kiddushin, but rather some short time beforehand. Nowadays, we don't let them see. People don't usually see each other for the whole week until their wedding. But this is the opposite, that they would be together a little bit so that he would become accustomed to her, and they wouldn't be so awkward after the wedding when they had to actually go ahead and consummate. But in the Galil, they would not do so. They would not be together at all until after the wedding. ביהודה בראשונה היו מעמידין להן שני שושבינים, אחד לו ואחד לה, כדי למשמש את החתן ואת הכלה בשעת כניסתן לחופה, ובגליל לא היו עושים כן. In Judea, this is the second custom, first they would bring two groomsmen, one for him and one for her, to help them out during the wedding. Now, so the groomsmen, they would do two things. First of all, help them out during the preparation. But more importantly, after the wedding, that night, these two people would stay around with the bride and groom, and their job would be to check to make sure that nothing happened there was no trickery involved. That she didn't bring in a bed sheet with blood on it. He didn't hide the blood sheet, the bed sheet that had blood on it, or anything like that. And so there would be kind of witnesses to make sure that if she was a betula, then there would be evidence that to say so. And if she was not, no one could trick against that evidence. What you see here is that this was done in Judea. And therefore, this assumes that they were not together beforehand, because if we allowed them to be secluded before the wedding, then there's no ta'anat betulim, no matter what. And so there would be no need to bring groomsmen to make sure that no one did any trickery. Therefore, from the fact that at some point in Judea they did have groomsmen, that means that there would be a ta'anat betulim, which means that they did not have seclusion beforehand. So already from these two clauses of the Mishnah, we can see that there were some times when they had seclusion before and sometimes when they did not have seclusion before the wedding. Anyway, in the Galilee, they did not do this at all, no matter what. Similar to the second one and the third one, it says that the groomsmen would actually sleep in the same house as the bride and groom, because they had to be there on call whenever needed to come and check out what happened and come to collect the bedsheet and make sure it doesn't get switched. So they had to actually stay there and be on call. Okay, v'chol shelo nahag k'minhag hazeh eno yachol liton tanat betulim. And then the Baraita ends with a phrase that we're not sure what it applies to. Anyone who did not do this custom cannot claim ta'anat betulim. So now this last clause, which case is it talking about in the Baraita? If it's talking about the Resha that says that they had a custom that they would have yichud, they would be secluded together before the wedding, and then should we say the opposite? Anyone who practices this practice to be together before the wedding cannot claim ta'anat betulim. But it says the opposite, kol shelo nahag, so the wording is wrong. Ela sefa, rather must be talking about the other cases with the groomsmen. And so anyone who did not practice and have the groomsmen there and ready the whole time to watch for no trickery, cannot claim ta'anat betulim. But then we say, wait, the wording isn't good there either, because kol shelo mushmash mi ba'ileh should have said anyone who did not have groomsmen to examine cannot make a claim. And so it could have used more exacting language. All right, so now which one is it? It's got to be one or the other. So we're going to see both possibilities. Amar Abaye le'olam aresha. Abaye says, in fact, it's talking about the first clause about the yichud utne kol shenahag. And you know what? Change the words of the Baraita of the last clause. Says anyone who has the custom that they are together, they allow the bride and groom to be together before the wedding, cannot be ta'anat betulim. Rava says, yeah, but you're changing the word and you're taking out the word lo. That's a significant difference. You can't do that. No, it could leave the law in, and it's like this. Anyone who did not do the practice of the Galilee in the Galilee to keep them separate the whole time, but instead they did the custom of Judea in the Galilee, and they allowed the couple to be together before the wedding, cannot claim ta'anat betulim. So according to this, even in the Galilee, there were some places that they would allow people to be together. Rav Ashi amar lo lama sefa utne kol shelo mushmash. Rav Ashi said, no, I could put it on the second clause and indeed change it to anyone who was not examined, anyone who did not have the groomsmen there, making sure there was no trickery. All right, in the end, anyway, we see that there were different customs and different geographies, and even within Judea, even within the Galilee, sometimes they allowed to be together, sometimes not. But any place where the couple was allowed to have yichud before the wedding, that's it. He cannot make any ta'anat betulim after that. We now continue with the next Mishnah, which is about the amount in the Ketubot. We already established that the amount is 200 and 100, but we're going to see that marrying a Kohen is considered a great privilege, and therefore, if a woman got to marry a Kohen, or a man got to marry a Bat Kohen, then she can say, hey, you know what? You got to pay 400. So let's see, Achat Almanat Yisrael v'Achat Almanat Kohanim Ketubata Maneh. If we were talking about an Almanah, it doesn't matter if she is Israelite, or she is the daughter of a Kohen, she gets 100 no matter what. This is kind of obvious, but we're only saying this because it contrasts with the Betula. Betin shel Kohanim. There was such a thing as a Betin of Kohanim. I guess it consisted of a lot of Kohanim and served Kohanim, maybe in a place where there were many Kohanim. We do know that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Dead Sea sect, they require that there be many Kohanim on every court. And even in the Torah and Devarim, it says that the Kohanim should be members of the court. Ubata la Kohanim halviyim. You come to them for judgment. Okay, anyway, so you had a remnant of these, even though halacha eventually said you don't even need any kohanim on the court, but there were still some of these courts that were made up of kohanim. Hayu govin libtula arba'a me'ot zuz, and they made an established rule that anyone who is going to marry a bat kohen, that's a great privilege, so you got to treat her even better and promise her 400 zuz in the ketubah. Chachamim, and the Chachamim did not protest it. They went along with it. It sounds like there might have been other cases where the Betin of Kohanim did something that the other Chachamim said, no, that's not a good law. But here they were fine with it, and because it is a great privilege to marry a Bat Kohen. Good. Tana, we have a Braita. Almanat Kohanim ketubata matayim. That in Almanah also, if she was a Bat Kohen, she gets 200, which makes sense. If the Betula Bat Kohen gets 400, then Almanah Bat Kohen gets 200. But this contradicts our Mishnah. V'hanan tenan achat almanat Yisrael v'achat almanat Kohanim ketubatan maneh. The first clause says in Almanah, even if she's a Bat Kohen, she only gets 100. How come this Baraita says 200? We're going to answer that we're actually talking about different times of enactments. At first, the Betin of Kohanim said to marry a Betula, who is a Bat Kohen, that's really special. So they made it 400, but they left the Almanah at 100. They didn't change that. But then the court saw that people are treating Almanah, that a Bat Kohen, in a light manner. Because only 100 is not the same as everybody else. So takinu lehumatan. So they said, you know what? Second enactment, we're going to say that an almanah or Bat Kohen gets 200. But then they saw that this enactment did not help them. It actually hurt the almanot because no one would marry them. People were thinking, listen, if I'm going to spend 200 zuz, I'd rather get a Bat Yisrael who's a Betula for 200 rather than an Almanah who's a Bat Kohen also for 200. And then no one was marrying these poor Almanot. So they said, okay, forget it. Go back to the original enactment. And so the Braita that says 200 is talking about that middle period when they said it's 200, but the Mishnah that said Almanah gets only 100 is talking about before and after that rabbinic enactment. Good. Betin shel Kohanim. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel lo betin shel Kohanim bilbad amru ela afilu mishpachot miyuchasot b'Yisrael im rasu lasot kederech shekohanim osin. So not only is there an enactment by Betin Kohanim that says for Bat Yisrael you have to give her 400. But rather, any distinguished family, you have the Rothschilds, and they say, listen, anyone who marries one of our family, they have to pay 400 because we're very important people. They can do that, and all this is considered the baseline. In a ketubah, like nowadays, you can always add more, right? And generally, we add 18,000, 26,000. You can always add more money to it. But talking about the absolute requirement, that's usually 200. If you're a special family and you say, listen, it's a privilege to marry our family, you want to make it 400, they have the right to do that. But we have a challenge. Meti behadoseh lasot kederech shekohanim osin, kegon bat Yisrael lekohen, ubat kohen liYisrael osin. Bat Yisrael lekohen, ubat kohen liYisrael hu deikasad kehuna, aval bat Yisrael liYisrael la. We have a Braita that seems to limit this possibility and says anyone who wants to do what the Kohanim do, they can do that. For example, if it's a Bat Yisrael marrying a man who's a Kohen, or if she is a Bat Kohen marrying Yisrael, either way, they can add more to the Ketubah amount. Now, that's the end of the Braita. We can infer from this that only if one of them is a Kohen, right? Either way, it's interesting. Even if he is the Kohen, and he's marrying a Bat Kohen, still he can say oh, this is going to be we can say it should be 400, because if either one is a Kohen, the whole group, the whole thing becomes more distinguished, and so it's a privilege for the Kohen to say, "See, I'm a Kohen, I give 400." Fine. So in those cases, you can do it. But we can infer from this that if it was Bat Yisrael to Yisrael, that's not one of the cases that's mentioned here. So maybe you cannot go ahead and add more on your own. Would not be allowed. I mean, you can add more as a Tosefet Ketubah, but you can't add more to the baseline requirement of 200. So we answer, Lami Bayakama. No, this Baraita is including that case also. And it wants to say, it's not necessary to state this case, and all the more so. Even in the second case, Lomi Baya Bat Yisrael. I don't even have to tell you that you can add more when it's a Bat Yisrael to Israel. Because the groom cannot say to her, "Listen, by marrying you, I'm raising your social status," because they're both Yisrael. So if he's a Rothschild and says, "Look, see, I'm raising your status," and she's a Yisrael, so then or she's a Rothschild, right? And therefore she can claim, hey, you have to pay 400 zuz. Yes, so there's no problem if it's Yisrael. Right? The one is raising the status of the other. That's, of course, would be permitted. The Baraita is only mentioning the following case because you might think not. Aval Bat Yisrael le Kohen. Let's say she's a Rothschild. She's marrying a Kohen. Dematse amar la aluye kama alinan lich, where he can say to her, hey, I'm a Kohen. I'm raising up your status. What, you think you're so special? I'm not paying extra for you. You should be privileged marrying a Kohen, not I'm privileged marrying a Rothschild. No. So we might think that, so you cannot raise the money there. Emala kamashmatlan. I might think there, in that case, he cannot raise it, she cannot demand that he raise it. So therefore, Kamashmalan, we learn, and from this Baraita, that even if he is a Kohen, still the family, that's an aristocratic family, can say, yeah, even if we marry a Kohen, the Kohen has to pay 400 zuz for marrying into our important family. All right, and the last Mishnah for today, one that we saw a preview of already yesterday. They get married and he does not find betulim. He omeret mishe erastani ne'enasti. He says, listen, what happened is at the time of the Ketubah writing, I was a betula, but after the Kiddushin, I was raped. And therefore, too bad for you, your field got flooded. And so I did nothing wrong. You still have to pay me the 200. And he says, no, it was you must have been raped before the Kiddushin, and you didn't tell me. And I only entered into the Kiddushin on condition that you're a betula. You're not, and therefore mekach ta'ut. This is a mistaken transaction, and I'm not giving you anything. Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer omrim ne'emenet. So Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer say that she is believed and she gets her money. Rabbi Yoshua omer lo mepi hanochayin ela hare zo becheskat be'ula ad shelo titares v'itatu ad shetabir aya lidvareha. And Rabbi Yoshua, on the other hand, says we do not conduct ourselves based on her words. Rather, we have a chazakah that she must have been probably that she the be'ula before the kiddushin, however, even if raped or whatever, and she tricked him and said that she was betula and married under false pretenses until she can bring some kind of proof that in fact she was a betula at the time of the kiddushin. The Gemara is now going to compare the case of the Mishnah with a general case of monetary issue where someone says, you owe me money, and regarding proof. And it's parallel to the Mishnah. Itmar mane li biyadecha v'hala omed eni yodeya. One person says, you have $100 in your hands that you owe me. You owe me $100. And the other one says, I'm not sure. He just doesn't know. Could be alright. He's not denying it, but he's not sure. Rav Yehuda v'Rav Huna amre hayav, v'Rav Nachman v'Rabbi Yochanan amre patur. Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna says he has to pay. Let's see why. Rav Huna v'Rabbi Yehuda amre hayav bari v'shema bari adif. The reason is because if someone has a certain claim and the other one is just not sure, the certain claim wins out, and so he has to pay. Rav Nachman v'Rabbi Yochanan amre patur. They say he does not have to pay because okay, mamona becheskat mare. We leave the money in the established position of where it is. Leave the status quo. If you want to extract money, you have to bring absolute proof and can't just make a claim and then collect just because the other guy doesn't remember. And so therefore, the chazakah is stronger than the bari, than the certain claim of the other person. All right, so this is a machloket regarding monetary matters. And now we're going to see some discussion about this. Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. Had Rav Huna v'Rav Yehuda dishmuel hi. The opinion that is cited in the name of Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, they were both students of Shemuel. So actually, that's really derives from Shemuel's opinion. And here I'm going to show you how. Ditnan, we have a Mishnah that's coming up on the next daf. Hayta me'oberet ve'amru la mati bo shel ubar zeh. We find the woman, she's pregnant. And the Beit Din asks her, how are you pregnant? Who is the father? What's going on? And she says, Me'ish piloni ve'kohen hu. The father is this person, and he is a kohen, meaning he's of good lineage. Not necessarily a kohen, that's just an example. But the point is that he's good, he's not a mamzer, he's not a problem. So do we believe her? Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, yes, Rabban Gamliel says, and Rabbi Eliezer also, we do believe her. That's Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. They are the same two, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, who also say we believe her in this case in the Mishnah. Okay. Ve'amar Rav Yehuda amar Shemuel halacha ke Rabban Gamliel. Shemuel says we follow Rabban Gamliel and we believe her that the kid is kosher. And now we're continuing that conversation there. Ve'amar le Rav Shemuel bar Yehuda le Rav Yehuda. And so Rav Yehuda was told Shinina, that was his nickname because he was very sharp, Rav Yehuda. Amad lan mishmed de Shemuel halacha ke Rabban Gamliel af barishona. He says you already told us that the law follows Rabban Gamliel even in the first case. Now, what you said in the name of Shemuel, even in the first case. Now, what is it talking about even in the first case? My af barishona. Oh, we're talking about the Mishnah. Our Mishnah that we read. Even though in that case you might claim leave the money where it is. In that case, that was a husband and wife, and the husband claims I don't owe you money because you cheated. You were a be'ula before the time of the ketubah, and she says no. It was I was raped after the time of the kiddushin, and it's your problem. We believe her, and we even believe her claim to remove money from his pocket, to remove the chazakah. So if that's true, in that case where you have to remove the money based on her claim, then we would similarly believe the claim of the borrower, who the lender who says, "Hey, you owe me money," where he's extracting the money from where it is. In both cases, the one who's making the claim is sure. The one who says, "Hey, you owe me money," he's sure that you owe me money, and also the woman who says that the rape happened before kiddushin. She knows for sure; she was there. Whereas the husband, he's not sure. He says maybe it was after, maybe it was before, but he's not sure, and therefore they're saying, "Hey, you already told us this that halacha is like Rabban Gamliel. That halacha is like in the name of Shemuel. The halacha is like Rabban Gamliel. These are in fact parallel cases. Okay, good. Now that we know that discussion, we're going to try to connect the financial case with our Mishnah. Le'ema Rav Yehuda v'Rav Huna tamre k'Rabban Gamliel. Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna, who said, we believe the person who says you owe me $100, they seem to agree with Rabban Gamliel in our Mishnah, who says we believe her to say I was raped beforehand and I was raped after the Kiddushin, and therefore it was not mekach ta'ut. I told you the truth that I was a betula at the time, and therefore you owe me money. So those two fit together. Whereas Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan, in the financial case, they said that no, even if you say you're sure that I owe you $100, you have to bring absolute proof. Even though I'm not sure, you have to bring proof because I have the chazakah. My money's in my hands, and therefore you do not collect the money. That would seem to be the same as Rabbi Yehoshua in our Mishnah, who says we do not believe her claim that she was a betula at the time of the kiddushin and she was only raped afterwards. No, she let her bring proof that that's true, and then and only then she can collect. So they say that the chazakah is stronger. Okay, this makes sense that we line it up this way. But again, we never want to pigeonhole an amorat. It has to be with one specific Tana. So Rav Nachman can say, Ana damre afilu kedavan gamliel. Rav Nachman says, even though I say in the financial case prefer the chazakah, I still would agree with Rabban Gamliel that we believe the woman. Ad kan lo kamar Rabban Gamliel hatam ela deika migo. The reason we believe the woman to say that I was a betula at the time of the ketubah and I was raped after the kiddushin and sorry you lost your field is because she could have made another claim. She could have said, I was mukat eitz, and she would have been able to collect the money. And, usually a groom is not so annoyed at mukat ayetz because she was not with another man, and in that case she would have been believed. And since she didn't say that claim, she did another claim. If she was lying, she could have lied and made an even better claim. So that's why we believe the woman. But in the monetary case, what else could he have said? There was no other claim that he could have said better, and that's why we don't believe the guy who comes and says you owe me $100 and he doesn't have any proof, and just that the other guy doesn't remember. That's one option. Inameh, or another option in the same, also that Rav Nachman would agree with Rabban Gamliel. Ad kan lo kamar Rabban Gamliel hatam ela damrinan ukma achazaka. Aval hacha my chazaka it lehai. Rabban Gamliel only agreed to believe her because she has a chazaka. Chazaka that she was a betula. Every girl is a bitula beforehand, so we can continue that chazakah and continue that presumption. But here, the guy who says you owe me $100, he doesn't have a chazakah. The money is in the other guy's hands, and we don't have a prior status where the guy who's claiming the money had the money beforehand, and so there's no chazakah. So that's why there are a couple of ways to distinguish between the two cases, and Rav Nachman can, in fact, say, I agree with Rabban Gamliel. And we conclude and we say, Hachinami mistabera, kedekam mishanenan. In fact, either of these two answers actually make sense. We are going to go with that Rav Nachman and Rabban Gamliel agree. That Rav Nachman hu damar ke Rabban Gamliel. Why? Dimken kashya el cheta, because if we don't say that, then we're going to have two halachic principles that are going to clash with each other. We have one principle that says we follow the rule of the rulings of Rav Nachman when it comes to monetary cases, and therefore we want him to be the halacha. And in the case of the Mishnah, Rav Yehuda and Nefesh said halacha is like Rabban Gamliel. So we want both of these to be the halacha. So therefore, and therefore it makes sense to assume that Rav Nachman does not contradict Rabban Gamliel, but for either of those two reasonings, he actually agrees with it, and therefore the two halachic principles agree with each other. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.